Imagine the exact tool a kidnapper uses to stay completely anonymous, becoming the one thing that will put them behind bars. In the deeply hidden digital underworld, cryptocurrency is often viewed by criminals as an untraceable phantom currency completely designed to hide the most sinister and violent transactions from the watchful and relentless eyes of law enforcement agencies across the globe. But the actual reality of digital forensics is often far more complicated and perilous for the perpetrator than the internet myth suggests. When an 84-year-old woman is suddenly taken from the quiet safety of her home in the dead of the desert night, the physical silence left behind in the empty rooms is completely terrifying for her family. Long, agonizing days pass with absolutely no word and no clear direction for the local or federal authorities to follow. Then a highly sophisticated and chilling ransom note suddenly arrives demanding millions of dollars to be paid exclusively in Bitcoin. This communication is definitely not a chaotic scribble on a piece of torn paper left at a physical scene. This is a highly calculated digital extortion attempt specifically aimed at extracting massive wealth through what the masked perpetrator falsely believes is an entirely invisible financial channel. But the arrogant choice of Bitcoin immediately introduces a massive and potentially fatal contradiction into the very heart of this complex investigation. The kidnapper has utilized a financial network that is fundamentally built on a completely public ledger system where every single digital transaction is permanently recorded and entirely visible to anyone in the world who has an internet connection. By demanding millions of dollars in this highly specific digital asset, the unknown suspect has unwittingly handed federal investigators a potential roadmap to their true and hidden identity. The very digital mechanism carefully chosen to ensure a clean and untraceable getaway might just be the exact digital anchor that ultimately drags them down into a federal prison cell. We are going deeply examine the exact chilling contents of that cryptic monetary demand and thoroughly explore how digital forensics experts meticulously analyze complex blockchain data to eventually unmask violent suspects who arrogantly think they are completely untouchable in the modern age. If you want to track the digital footprints of the world's most elusive criminals, hit subscribe to Tracking Evil with John. We will dive deep into the completely verified facts and the undeniable forensic evidence surrounding this terrifying abduction, purposefully stripping away the relentless internet rumors to focus purely on the cold forensic reality of the ongoing case. The dark intersection of violent physical crime and advanced cyber technology creates a uniquely modern and highly complex nightmare for investigators to unravel. The perpetrator confidently thought they were operating securely in the unseen shadows, but the specific digital footprint they carelessly left behind tells a completely different and revealing story entirely. Let us carefully begin by looking at the quiet environment that existed just before the violent crime. Took place a setting entirely defined by strict quiet routine and absolute biological vulnerability. An 84-year-old woman living entirely alone operates on a necessary foundation of strict predictability and unyielding biological necessity. Her daily and nightly existence is completely tethered to a vital and unchangeable regimen of specific medications specifically designed to keep her aging and fragile body functioning normally. She does not just casually live in her Tucson, Arizona home, she entirely relies on it as a highly secure and predictable medical sanctuary against the outside world. Furthermore, and most crucially for this investigation, she is entirely dependent on a surgically implanted pacemaker. This vital piece of technology is not merely a simple mechanical device keeping her fragile heart in a steady rhythm, but it acts as a continuous and vital digital transmitter. The medical pacemaker is constantly sending critical health data via a steady Bluetooth connection to a receiving mobile device, precisely mapping her cardiovascular health in real time for her doctors. This constant unseen data transmission represents a quiet digital heartbeat, a rhythmic and entirely invisible pulse, steadily pinging through the quiet rooms of her secure residence. Her daily routines are very quiet and largely unvarying day after day. On the surface, this appears to be a completely peaceful and highly secure retirement in the desert. But this absolute medical dependency establishes a terrifying baseline of extreme physical fragility. The viewing audience must clearly understand this total and unyielding reliance on both her physical daily medication and her constant digital medical equipment to fully grasp the true and present horror of what is about to abruptly happen to her. She is the mother of a highly visible television host, Savannah Guthrie, bringing a completely unspoken but very real layer of public visibility to an otherwise intensely private and quiet life. Yet inside the secure walls of that specific house, she is simply an elderly woman requiring highly precise medical care just to comfortably survive another single day. The desert home is equipped with standard residential security measures, including a very specific doorbell camera designed to constantly monitor the immediate perimeter of the property. Inside the quiet house, the local internet router quietly processes the vital data from her chest, constantly sending it out into the wider medical network. The home environment is entirely defined by these dual steady pulses, the physical beating of her fragile heart and the steady digital transmission of its current status. Every single pill she takes and every single time the pacemaker quietly syncs with her mobile phone establishes a clear and undeniable record of her physical presence and her ongoing survival. When any person is this deeply reliant on their immediate environment for their very life, any sudden disruption to that routine is instantly and profoundly catastrophic. The unknown predator who eventually targets this specific home is knowingly stepping into an environment where a human life literally depends on unbroken routine. Understanding this deep fragility is absolutely crucial because the specific and intimate medical data quietly generated in this quiet house is exactly what the cruel kidnapper will later use to undeniably prove they hold her violently captive. They will intentionally weaponize her physical vulnerability to completely terrorize her loving family. As the sun slowly sets and the house settles deeply into the profound silence of the Arizona desert night, the electronic devices continue their completely silent and routine conversations. At 9:48 post-meridium, her son-in-law safely drops her off after a quiet family dinner, waiting patiently until she is securely inside the home before driving away. At precisely 9:50 post-meridium, the heavy garage door closes securely, shutting out the dark desert night. Everything appears to be functioning exactly as it should be. The night air is very still and the surrounding neighborhood is completely quiet. But this seemingly perfect tranquility is deeply and terrifyingly deceptive. The rhythmic transmission of the pacemaker data pinging steadily off the router in the empty quiet house is simply a digital heartbeat waiting to be violently interrupted. Sometime in the oppressive and completely silent darkness of the early morning hours, the secure perimeter of the home is suddenly breached. At exactly 1:47 in the morning, the doorbell camera monitoring the front of the house is actively and purposefully disconnected by an unknown intruder, plunging the digital record into absolute darkness. But the terrifying timeline does not end there. For 41 agonizing minutes, the suspect is reportedly inside the dark house with the sleeping elderly woman. Finally, at 2:28 in the morning, the pacemaker application registers a complete and final disconnect from her mobile phone, indicating she has been entirely removed from the physical proximity of the receiving device. Nancy completely vanishes into the cold desert night. When the worried family finally reports her missing at noon after she fails to attend morning church services, the responding police arrive at 12:15 post-meridium to a scene that is deeply unsettling in its lack of obvious physical chaos. There are absolutely no immediate signs of a frantic and violent physical struggle tearing the quiet house apart. Instead, the trained investigators find a chilling and profound stillness throughout the residence. The most alarming discoveries are the specific personal items left behind in the untouched residence. Her essential mobile phone sits completely untouched and entirely disconnected from the missing pacemaker. Her personal purse and her wallet remain exactly where she quietly left them, indicating she definitely did not leave the home voluntarily or plan a sudden personal trip. Her vehicle is still parked completely securely at the Tucson property, but the absolute most terrifying detail of all is the stark discovery of her life-saving daily medications still inside the home. The very essential pills she absolutely requires to maintain her fragile health are sitting inside the house, completely abandoned. For an 84-year-old woman with a heavily monitored pacemaker to suddenly disappear without her receiving phone, and her vital medication is a blaring and immediate alarm for local law enforcement. The local police and the Federal Bureau of Investigation immediately recognized this situation as a highly critical and life-threatening emergency. Surveillance images carefully recovered by the Federal Bureau of Investigation from residual data on the disconnected camera show a completely masked individual boldly wearing a handgun holster standing ominously outside the front door. The initial physical silence following the terrible discovery is completely deafening for everyone involved. The desperate family members who have been fully and officially cleared as potential suspects by the local Pima County Sheriff Department are entirely paralyzed by the absolute lack of any communication from the abductor. Crucial hours slowly turn into long, grueling days with absolutely no clear indication of where she was violently taken or exactly who is responsible for tearing her away from her highly secure medical environment. The federal authorities meticulously scour the entire property for any microscopic clues, successfully recovering an unknown male deoxyribonucleic acid profile that does not match anyone in close daily contact with the victim. They rapidly search the surrounding arid desert landscape, eventually finding discarded gloves 2 miles away, but testing incredibly traces them only to a local restaurant worker with absolutely zero connection to the violent crime. The perpetrator has effectively vanished, completely taking a highly vulnerable elderly woman with them into the dark. The complete vacuum of reliable information creates a deeply suffocating and agonizing tension for the federal investigators and the terrified family. The critical answers clearly do not come from the physical crime scene, but eventually from the digital ether. The terrifying and complete silence successfully holds for 2 long, grueling days. Then late on, the dark night of February 3rd, the oppressive digital silence is suddenly and very violently shattered. The critical break in the complex case does not come from a panicked phone call to the local police precinct or a physical handwritten note quietly left on a vehicle windshield. Instead, a digital message is transmitted directly to the national media, specifically targeting prominent news affiliates and online journalistic outlets. This sudden and highly public external communication changes the entire investigative trajectory of the ongoing case, rapidly shifting it from a quiet local missing person search to a highly public and incredibly high stakes digital hostage situation. The targeted media outlets immediately receive the first terrifying ransom notes, and the specific chilling contents immediately elevate the federal threat level to completely unprecedented heights. These incoming digital messages are absolutely not chaotic or poorly spelled demands from a disorganized or panicked street criminal. They are meticulously and coldly drafted, entirely clinical, and completely non-negotiable in their terrifying tone. The specific language carefully used in the encrypted emails is incredibly cold and highly calculated, displaying a truly terrifying level of psychological control over the situation. But what truly shocks the seasoned federal investigators and successfully sends a massive wave of pure dread through the waiting family are the highly specific and guarded details included in the digital text. The unknown sender does not just boldly claim to have the elderly victim, they brutally prove it with devastating and undeniable accuracy. The notes contain horrifyingly precise and accurate details about her deeply unpublished medical conditions, details that only someone looking directly at her physical body or her highly private medical records could possibly know. Furthermore, the encrypted emails precisely describe the exact specific clothing she was wearing on the exact night she was violently taken from her Tucson home. These are definitely not lucky or random guesses by an internet opportunist. This is indisputable and horrifying proof of life, or at the very least, proof of extreme physical proximity to the victim. The mass sender has absolute and terrifying power in this cruel dynamic, and they are intentionally using these intimate and private medical facts to mercilessly bludgeon the terrified family into rapid compliance Then finally comes the ultimate and shocking digital demand. The clinical note does not ask for heavy physical briefcases full of unmarked and non-sequential paper bills to be quietly dropped at a remote and dark physical location. Instead, the highly sophisticated kidnapper aggressively demands millions of dollars to be paid entirely and exclusively in Bitcoin. They confidently provide a very specific digital wallet address, and they set a highly rigid and unforgiving deadline for the massive financial transaction to be completely finalized. This sudden pivot to demanding digital cryptocurrency forces the Federal Bureau of Investigation to rapidly mobilize their highly specialized cybercrime units. The kidnapper has effectively proven they currently have her, and they have clearly demonstrated a truly chilling level of technical sophistication by completely bypassing all traditional physical ransom methods. But the specific arrogant choice of a trackable cryptocurrency immediately raises a massive and completely unexplained question about their true and hidden identity and their ultimate and final endgame. What kind of kidnapper operates exactly like a highly organized cyber syndicate? Let me know your theories below. The strict demand for digital currency instantly shifts the primary investigative battleground from the physical dusty streets of Arizona directly to the complex decentralized networks of the global internet. The unseen perpetrator truly believes they have perfectly constructed an entirely inescapable digital trap for the desperate family holding a highly fragile human life delicately in the balance while safely hiding behind a thick veil of advanced digital encryption. The federal authorities are now desperately racing against a terrifying biological clock, ticking rapidly for the vulnerable victim, and a rigid digital clock set by a highly confident phantom extortionist. The Federal Bureau of Investigation immediately and meticulously dissects every single digital syllable of the shocking ransom note. Advanced cyber experts rapidly isolate the hidden email headers, trace the complex routing data, and fiercely focus their primary investigative attention on the absolute most critical piece of digital evidence provided by the kidnapper, which is the specific Bitcoin wallet address. The provided address is quickly and officially verified by federal agents as completely valid and currently active on the global blockchain network. The unseen suspect has perfectly set the digital stage for a truly massive and completely unprecedented transfer of digital wealth. However, highly trained experts in advanced digital forensics quickly point out the massive and potentially fatal flaw in the incredibly arrogant plan of the extortionist. The entire core architecture of the Bitcoin network strictly relies on a completely public and immutable ledger system. This technical reality means that every single financial transaction, every minute movement of even a fraction of a digital coin is permanently and immutably recorded for the entire world to clearly see. It is entirely pseudo-anonymous and absolutely not entirely invisible, as many amateur criminals falsely believe. The federal authorities now have a definitive and highly sensitive digital trap perfectly set. They continuously monitor the specific wallet address around the clock, patiently waiting for the exact moment the massive ransom might be finally paid, or the critical moment the arrogant suspect attempts to move any existing digital funds. The psychological tension massively mounts as the digital clock ticks relentlessly toward the first strict deadline, aggressively established by the kidnapper, which is firmly set for February 5th at exactly 5 o'clock post-meridium. Federal investigators watch the scrolling digital ledger with intense and unyielding scrutiny, fully knowing that if the massive amount of money suddenly drops and the suspect foolishly attempts to quickly move it through a complex network of cryptocurrency tumblers or attempts to clean it through a legitimate exchange, they might finally make a critical technical error, exposing their true hidden internet protocol address. But as the agonizing hours slowly bleed away and the strict 5 o'clock deadline rapidly approaches, the intense digital surveillance yields absolutely nothing but agonizing and complete stillness. The federal authorities are basically staring endlessly at a completely empty digital wallet. The first rigid deadline slowly arrives and quietly passes without a single digital coin entering or leaving the highly specified cryptocurrency address. The frustrated investigators are left uncomfortably grappling with a truly chilling and terrifying reality. Is the suspect incredibly disciplined, patiently waiting out the federal authorities? Or is this a cruel psychological game intentionally designed to maximize the deep emotional suffering of the desperate family? The profound silence on the digital blockchain is just as deafening and terrifying as the physical silence left behind in the completely empty Tucson house. The Federal Bureau of Investigation continuously and tirelessly traces the complex origins of the encrypted emails. But the advanced encryption methods utilized by the unknown sender proved to be incredibly highly sophisticated, repeatedly bouncing through multiple secure global servers to perfectly mask the true physical point of origin. The massive federal investigation quickly becomes a truly grueling and seemingly endless staring contest between highly trained federal agents and a silently blinking cursor on a complex blockchain explorer. Every single agonizing minute that passes without a digital transaction is another terrifying minute, and fragile 84-year-old woman remains hidden away in an entirely unknown location, completely deprived of her essential and life-saving daily medications. The dedicated authorities meticulously analyze the highly specific wording of the digital demands, constantly looking for hidden linguistic tells or subtle regional syntax errors that might somehow narrow down the exact geographic location of the confident sender. But the extremely clinical and cold nature of the writing stubbornly offers very few actionable clues. The specific digital footprint absolutely exists, but it remains incredibly and stubbornly static. The exhausted investigators are violently forced to acknowledge that while they definitely have the exact digital address of the designated drop-off point, they currently have absolutely no concrete idea exactly who is confidently waiting on the other side of the glowing screen to eventually collect the massive digital ransom. The initial digital stillness surrounding the specified Bitcoin wallet address does not signal an end to the terrifying ordeal, but instead marks the beginning of a much more chaotic and fractured phase of the federal investigation. As the primary February 5th deadline quietly expires without a single Satoshi moving through the blockchain, the investigators find themselves suddenly submerged in a tidal wave of fresh digital noise. The high-profile nature of the victim and the widely publicized involvement of her famous daughter create a perfect storm for digital predators. New and increasingly aggressive ransom notes begin to flood the electronic inboxes of major media outlets in Arizona and beyond. These emerging communications shift the demands entirely away from the original Bitcoin address. One particularly chilling message reportedly received by a television station in Boston and documented by news affiliates demands a staggering $6 million, but specifies a completely different and more obscure type of cryptocurrency. This third major communication includes graphic and horrifying threats concerning the physical safety of the elderly victim if the new demands are not met immediately. The Federal Bureau of Investigation now faces a tactical nightmare because they must simultaneously track the original sophisticated kidnapper while filtering out a sudden swarm of opportunistic digital vultures. Each new email requires a full forensic teardown to determine if the linguistic patterns match the original cold and clinical ransom note. The waters are further muddied when various individuals begin contacting the family directly through private mobile channels, bypass the media entirely to ask about specific Bitcoin transaction details. This fragmentation of the narrative creates a massive level of frustration for the authorities, because every false lead and every cruel hoax diverts precious resources away from the primary search for the actual abduction site. To see how investigators cut through this kind of forensic noise, make sure your notifications are turned on for Tracking Evil with John. The struggle to identify the signal within the static becomes a race against the biological clock of an 84-year-old woman who has now been without her heart medication for several long days. The investigators are forced to ask themselves if the original kidnapper has lost control of the narrative, or if the entire situation was always designed to be a multi-layered psychological operation. The confusion on the ground mirrors the chaos in the digital ether as the global true crime community begins to speculate wildly. Yet, the federal agents remain focused on the one thing that cannot be faked, which is the original intimate medical knowledge of the victim. They continue to treat the first Bitcoin wallet as the only legitimate anchor in a sea of escalating misinformation and cruelty. The tension finally reaches its absolute breaking point when the federal authorities realize that the digital trail they are following has become a house of mirrors, where everyone claims to have the victim, but only one entity can prove it through the blockchain. Amidst this suffocating atmosphere of digital deception, a sudden and violent breakthrough finally occurs that shatters the central mystery of the secondary ransom demands. Federal agents acting on a lightning-fast digital trace coordinate with local law enforcement to execute a high-stakes arrest in California. The man taken into custody is identified as Derek Colella, and he is officially accused of sending a series of fraudulent and incredibly cruel ransom messages directly to the victim's daughter and son-in-law. Colella did not have Nancy Guthrie, and he had absolutely no physical connection to the original abduction site in Tucson. Instead, he was a cold-blooded opportunist who monitored the news coverage and used the public mention of Bitcoin to craft his own extortion attempt. His arrest is the highest peak of the investigation so far because it finally explains why the ransom demands became so contradictory and chaotic after the initial February 5th deadline. The revelation that a total stranger would leverage a national tragedy for a digital payout sends a massive shockwave through the public. But the most significant impact of this arrest is that it finally clears the forensic field for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. With the California hoaxer in handcuffs, the authorities can now definitively confirm that the myriad of secondary notes were nothing more than a series of opportunistic hoaxes designed to profit from a family's absolute agony. The family themselves confirm through their legal representatives that while they were bombarded with messages, they only truly believe two of the original notes were authentic. This realization brings the focus back to the original and terrifyingly precise perpetrator who still remains a ghost. The arrest of Colella does not bring Nancy home, but it strips away the digital mask of the secondary predators and exposes the raw and terrifying reality of the primary investigation. The sophisticated suspect who knew about the pacemaker and the specific clothing is still out there hiding behind the original Bitcoin wallet address. The peak of the investigation is a bitter realization that while one monster is in a cell, the primary mastermind is still holding the digital keys to a human life. The focus now shifts back to the silent blockchain ledger where the original millions remain unclaimed. The federal authorities now know with absolute certainty that they are dealing with a predator who is far more disciplined and dangerous than a common internet scammer. The hunt for the source of the original authenticated emails resumes with a new and desperate intensity because the noise has been silenced, but the clock is still ticking for Nancy. Hit the like button if you think the penalties for true crime hoaxers need to be severely increased to prevent this kind of investigative interference in the future. The resolution of the Derek Colella subplot allows the primary investigation to return to its cold and clinical roots. The Federal Bureau of Investigation refocuses its entire massive technical apparatus on the original Bitcoin address that was provided in the very first authenticated ransom notes. The blockchain remains under constant 24-hour surveillance by specialized agents who are trained to wait for the smallest flicker of movement. The money demanded has not been moved, and the wallet remains a digital dead zone. This creates a strange and hollow resolution where the immediate threat of the hoaxers is gone, but the primary mystery is deeper than ever. The kidnapper is effectively trapped in a digital stalemate of their own making. Because the FBI has flagged a specific wallet address across every major global cryptocurrency exchange, the suspect cannot easily convert those digital millions into usable cash without triggering an immediate and irreversible identification through Know Your Customer protocols. The suspect holds the victim, but the federal authorities hold the exit doors to the financial system. This creates a cold and lingering suspense as the days turn into weeks. The physical search for Nancy Guthrie continues in the desert outskirts of Tucson, but the primary leads are now entirely digital. The family is left in a state of suspended animation, waiting for a digital ping that might never come. The investigation has successfully narrowed the field of suspects by eliminating the noise, but it has also revealed the terrifying patience of the original abductor. The suspect has not panicked despite the arrest of the California hoaxer, and they have not made the classic amateur mistake of trying to move the funds too early. This leaves at least one major and haunting question entirely unanswered. If the kidnapper knows the FBI is watching the wallet, why have they not sent a new address or a different demand? The resolution is not a happy ending, but a transition into a long-term forensic surveillance operation. The trail is not cold, but it is frozen in a digital ledger that the world is watching. This case forces us to confront a terrifying evolution in modern criminal behavior where the barrier between physical violence and digital extortion has completely dissolved. The primary educational lesson here is the absolute death of digital anonymity in the face of modern federal forensics. While many believe that cryptocurrency provides a perfect shield for illicit activity, the Nancy Guthrie case demonstrates that the blockchain is actually an indestructible and public receipt for every action taken. The concept of being pseudonymous is a trap for the ill-informed criminal because once a wallet is linked to a violent crime, it becomes a permanent beacon for law enforcement that can never be deleted or hidden. What this case teaches us about the shifting landscape of public safety is that our most intimate vulnerabilities are now digital. We have transitioned from a world where investigators looked for physical fingerprints on a paper note to a world where they must decode the metadata of a heart monitor to verify a life. The modern predator does not just steal a person, they steal their digital identity and their medical history to weaponize it against their loved ones. This requires a fundamental shift in how we view personal security and the protection of our private medical data. As the FBI continues to stare at that silent Bitcoin wallet, we are reminded that in the 21st century, the most dangerous criminals are no longer just hiding in the shadows of the physical world, but are operating from behind glowing screens in the vast and unregulated digital wilderness. The wallet remains under constant surveillance, and the digital heartbeat of the investigation continues to pulse in the silence. Nancy Guthrie is still out there, and the person who took her is still watching the same blockchain ledger as the rest of the world. The suspect has played their hand, but the final card has not been turned. Will the perpetrator eventually risk moving the digital coins, or will that wallet remain a multi-million-dollar tombstone for a crime that has no final resolution? Keep tracking the evidence with us as we monitor the movements of the world's most sophisticated digital predators. Subscribe to Tracking Evil. With John and I, we'll see you in the next case file where we will examine the rising threat of biometric identity theft in the underground market.